Dear church, let's do 10 questions for 10 preachers with Tim Lewis. Hello, and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Got my good friend Tim Lewis on the podcast today as we continue our series, 10 Questions for 10 Preachers. Tim, thanks so much for joining us. How are you? How's the family? How's the work at North MacArthur?
Hey, Chris, it's great to see you, man. Good to get caught up a little bit. Everything's going well. 18 years here at North MacArthur. It's been great.
Wow.
We followed Jeff and Laura Jenkins here, came into a really healthy situation. And as we talk about some of the blessings of ministry, I'm sure inheriting a work that's already healthy and has good leadership in place is one of the real blessings, I think, when you're in ministry. So family's doing great. I think both of us, you're a little farther ahead with your kids making it to college and through college. Our oldest just finished at OC. Her younger sister's a sophomore. We've got one at home still. Ryder's a junior, but everybody seems to be doing great. And, one of the wonderful things about being here at North MacArthur is I feel like as we minister to them, they've always ministered to us and to our family, which is, again, one of the great blessings of ministry.
People, I think you were on the podcast earlier. We talked about this, but you were in Mount Vernon, Missouri when I was in Cassville, Missouri. You left there to go to Oklahoma City in the time that I was at Cassville. So we kind of go back a ways, and I just really appreciate you taking time to be on here. 18 years, that just seems impossible that it's been that long, but I know it's been a fruitful 18 years. I know they're happy with you and you're happy there. So thank you for the work you're doing there.
That Southwest Missouri connection's one that we always value. And it's funny, I'm either right before you or right after you going to one of the gospel meetings there in Seneca or Neosho, and valuable, really some ministry roots in that part of the country. And church there has been really good to us. But I always crack up. It's either me, you, or Wes McAdams is in the mix up there too. Great.
Yeah. That's not bad company to be in.
Not at all. No.
One thing I want our viewers and listeners to know is I'm not a huge dog person. My mother was the president of the Humane Society in Greene County. And so I always had to deal with dogs and cats. And so when I got older, I was like, I'm not going to have a dog or a cat. I'm tired of dealing with animals because, you don't get the purebreds at the Humane Society. You get the dogs that bark all the time and everything. So I'm not a big dog person, especially little dogs. And I went to your house one time. True story.
It is true.
Tim's got a little dog, or he did have at the time, and apparently a sweet dog, but did not like me or what I was wearing. And I was doing some sort of meeting that night or maybe a seminar or something. And Tim's little dog bit me and tore my pants.
Oh, my word.
And only further solidified the reason why I don't like small dogs. But I'm sure it's a great dog, but for whatever reason, we don't get along.
That was a bad night, man. I think you were here for affirming the faith. You spoke someplace else that morning and stayed over and preached for us that night. But that happened, and I'm not a dog person either. But when my wife said we're getting a dog, and I said no, we got a dog.
Well, I think I'm the weirdo because I think most people are dog people, and I'm coming back around. I told my wife, we just moved to Walnut Street. We're looking for a house. I said, if we find a house out in the country, we need a big dog to kind of lay around. And so maybe I'm coming back around, but no hard feelings with you and the dog. I think we're all right. But
that dog never did that to anybody. That was so random and ruined your pants. And I think we mended that and we're still friends, but that was embarrassing.
Yeah, that was, I didn't have any trouble getting over that part of, and keeping the friendship, but just solidified why I don't
all the kids were on their best behavior. I thought, hey, the kids did well, but the dog, not so much.
That's usually how it works. So let's jump in, Tim.
Sure.
Tell me, what is the first question? What is the story behind you becoming a preacher? I know you have a really good story about how you came to Christ. Tell me what went into the whole decision to become a preacher.
I'm sure that my dad's conversion affected the decision. I probably didn't think much about it at the time. He was converted kind of early in life, fell away nearly 20 years when he came back. My mom, my brothers, we were all taught, led to Christ, and all of that was just, it was very life-changing. I think very dramatic things that were part of our life just went away, things that we had never done before started to become, prominent with our time and our attention. So that impacted it. But I would say, as far as going into ministry, there was a campus minister at Memorial Road. His name was Sean Smith, and Sean, it was probably the last semester before I finished a degree in English education. They were going to Florida. Hurricane Andrew kind of relief work. It was a spring break mission trip, and he invited me to go with the group. And I think on the way home, I was talking with him. We were driving back from Miami, and I think that experience, just a week of serving others, it really had an impact. We've got a coworker here that talks about parenting: win their hearts, fill their head, put their hands to work. And it was that third component: put your hands to work, actually doing something with your faith. I think that probably led me to the decision: I'm not going to teach, I'm going to preach.
Yeah. So you came to OC, Oklahoma Christian, to play basketball. Were you a Christian at that point?
We were, yes. In high school, when I was getting ready to graduate, we made a trip to Harding and to Freed and to OC, and most of the coaches said, "You're not big enough, you're not strong enough," Yeah. But Coach Hayes said I could be a walk-on, and I just wanted to play. I didn't care about, the scholarship would have been great, but just being on the team, being around basketball was important to me. My goal, thinking at that point, was I'm going to teach and coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you
already
similar background in that, you probably made it farther than I did. I never got, other than student teaching, I never made it into the classroom.
Well, I always said if it weren't for talent and ability, I'd be in the NBA.
But, you got
you already kind of alluded to it, but who are some of the people that inspired you along the way in this journey to be a preacher?
Sure. The campus minister I mentioned, Sean Smith, encouraged me. In fact, the summer after that little spring break mission trip, I spent 2 summers with his parents out in City working with teenagers and youth group. Howard Norton was just an incredible mentor. Mm-hmm. Howard was one of those people who somehow he sees what potential, I guess. I didn't know I could do what he knew I was able to do. Avon Malone he just impressed me so much, such a godly person. And even now, 26 years into full-time ministry, I've never run into anybody that knew Scripture as well as Avon did. Because of Howard Norton, one of the things, Howard is just a master at matching people with opportunities. He kind of directed me to Robert Oglesby, and the Waterview congregation is well known. I mean, years and years. They've had a summer intern. And I don't know that anybody's had a greater impact on how I arrange a sermon, just structure, so that I remember the first night I preached, he's like, you did good. They liked it. Some guy said, you do this pause. Do you know why you do that? I'm like, no. He said, because you don't know what you're going to say next. Which was kind of devastating. He's like, hey, you're going to cross a stream, pick out the rocks ahead of time, know where you're going.
Yeah.
And so those people, Howard in ministry has always been a person that I call for advice and guidance. He's always surrounded me with other people or opportunities. Robert's been a great mentor. Avon Malone, just his friendship and knowledge of Scripture, just a great mentor.
Yeah. You've come to our preacher training camp at Oldham Lane several times, and you've done a great job with that each time that you talk to these young preachers. Tell us a little bit about, I know you've talked to them about it, but talk to our viewers and listeners about what you think is the single greatest attribute for a preacher to have in order to be effective.
Single greatest is hard for me. And, I thought about faith. I thought about, not just loving God, but loving the people that you're preaching to. Really having a compassion. I think sometimes if we're not careful, the truth can be used to beat people up. I don't think that's what we're interested in doing. We want to share truth because we love people and we want to help them. We think God's way is the best way. And so we want to share God's way with others. But the more I thought about it, trying to center in one attribute, I just keep thinking about integrity. Keep thinking about character. When Ezra talks about not just knowing, but living and then sharing the precepts of God with Israel. It's one thing to know it and share it, but there's that middle component there where I think when people can see that you're trying, I don't think hypocrisy is that we have weaknesses. I think hypocrisy is we're not trying. We're pretending to be something that we're not.
Yeah.
I think that there are people who struggle terribly to live up to what they preach. They're not hypocrites.
No.
They're just either not mature. They're going to be mature as they keep striving. But there's always that. The only one that didn't have a gap between what he preached and how he lived is Jesus. The rest of us kind of struggle. But I think living our message in a way that's sincere and genuine, that people can see we're trying, even if we're not perfect. That guy up there talking to me means this. He's doing his best. I think that really matters.
Yeah.
Sometimes you meet people that are very gifted. And I thought about this in my own life. Would I rather be gifted or talented or faithful? You know what I'm saying? Character,
Right.
or talent. And I think character is more important.
Yeah. Very well said. Tim, in your time, so far as you can share, what has been the biggest challenge in your ministry?
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to piggyback off what I just said. Any time where I know, because I can't hide from me, I know where I am. I know what I'm into, what I'm doing. I think the biggest challenge for me is when I know that there's been a gap in judgment, a mistake with regard to integrity, character, and you feel like that there's a real struggle to face people on Sunday. And listen, that could be related to any number of different things that all of us are trying to be our best for God, and we miss the mark. And I think that's been really difficult. I remember one Sunday night, this is at the beginning when Steve Miner and I were here at North Mac, like 2004. He was new and I was new, and he preached on a Sunday night, and members wanted to know what I was doing there. I'm like, because I wasn't preaching. And I'm like, hey, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a member of this church too. And that feeling of, I'm the preacher, I'm the evangelist, but I'm part of this family. And there are days that I'm struggling to be everything God wants me to be. And I think that's hard. And not to, a preacher's image. Chris, I don't know if I'm saying that in a way that makes sense. I just want to be me. I just want to be honest about who I am and be a part of the family where all of us are encouraging each other and building each other up. I may be the guy that gets up to speak, but I don't know, being honest with all of that, having integrity, trying to be a good model of what I preach, I think all of that's really hard. I think something
No doubt
can be very discouraging.
No doubt. I find in my ministry and in my personal life, that's one of the biggest things that I struggle with is being the same person outside the pulpit that you are in the pulpit, and making sure that those two things match is difficult. And so I appreciate you sharing that. Let's turn it around. What do you think has been the biggest blessing in your life as a minister?
I think making a good choice in marriage, I think that's key. Tani is quiet, and she does not crave spotlight at all. But I can't imagine how I could do the things that God has allowed me to do over the past 26 years if I didn't have her in my life. So I think that's key. I've been extremely blessed with the elderships that I've worked with. So in Missouri, there were two retired preachers. One was more of a missionary, and the third had just retired. He was a elementary school principal. All three of those guys invested in me. All three of them supported me. Steve Cohue is the retired elementary school principal. Because he was retired, he'd come by the office, pick me up. We'd go make visits to all the elderly people and shut-ins and hospitals, and there was a great friendship there with those men. And one of the three elders was preaching there before I came, and some had actually warned me off that And that can be tough. I mean, it can be.
It can be.
It was.
Yes.
It wasn't. He was very supportive. And so, and then I came here, and I just think that the elders here, the strength here at North MacArthur, it's a wonderful congregation, but the eldership is outstanding. And when I say that, they are shepherds, and they feed, they all teach, they all, visit. I mean, some of the baptisms we've had recently, the elders were in the personal studies, they're sharing the gospel. But for me and my family, I feel like we have always had elders that shepherd us. And again, that may be a theme kind of in our discussion, Chris. I'm part of the family. I'm not just an outsider that's been hired. I came to stay. And so our family's part of this family. And, just like everybody else, we've gone through losses. We've gone through difficult challenges. And I've always felt like the elders have been sensitive to that, to really shepherd my faith and my family. And to understand there have been some difficult times, and to be very considerate about that. And the church as well. So, and not everybody, and I realize not everybody's had that experience. You know what I mean? Some people have had a real difficult relationship with leaders in the local congregation. I'm just not one of those people.
Yeah, me neither. I've been very blessed with that. And maybe that's another podcast episode, is dealing with those difficult, situations. Tell us a little bit about what your work week looks like. So, barring anything unforeseen, like having to do a funeral or things like that, if you could just come in and you can map out your week, what does that look like typically?
Yeah, I think there's a rhythm to it, although, you bring up funerals and other things that you don't expect. Sunday's a work day. I mean, I don't know. We had an intern, and he's actually trained, in ministry training right now. And he talked about going someplace. He taught class, and he preached Sunday morning, and he preached Sunday night, and he couldn't believe how tired he was, which is kind of funny. Yeah. There's an emotional fatigue that people don't really understand, because there are all these people that you're trying to connect with, and there's just a lot on your mind. Sunday's a work day. I mean, I usually get up here an hour before everybody else. You've got Bible class, morning worship. We usually close things down. You're shaking people in, shaking them out. I want to know people. I want to meet visitors. I want to welcome folks that maybe have been away for a while, come back Sunday night. So Monday morning is staff meeting, 10 o'clock. We kind of talk about the work of the week. We've got 5 full-time staff members, ministers, 2 secretaries. We meet every Monday morning and make a plan for the week. I meet with the elders Tuesday night. A lot of what we discuss in the staff meeting, we then kind of get, we take it to the eldership and kind of give us guidance, give us direction. And then, usually I'm reading. Early in the week, I'm reading. Early in the week, I want to be with people, Bible studies, things like that. Midweek is, devotional and Bible class. I turn the corner on Thursday and Friday. Sunday's coming, and I'm not as friendly on Thursday and Friday, because I've got to start really honing in on what I'm going to do on the lesson. My work week is, usually, office hours at 8 to 4:30, something like that, Monday through Thursday, 8 to noon on Friday. I'm usually up here a little bit on Saturday. I don't think that's wise, but it's hard for me to find a full day. There's just a lot of things. And you've done this. You mentioned preacher training camp, and you've been involved in a lot of other where you're planning and organizing events. And there's probably a lot more of that here than what I experienced in Missouri, which is good, but it's time consuming. So trying to find time to get everything done is difficult. I don't know how that answer, if that is what you had in mind, but that's kind of what it looks like. I'm almost always have a book. I'm almost always reading something. Even if you don't realize how you're going to use it later somehow, if you're reading, you draw something that influences how you think or what you say in a future lesson. So constant.
Yeah. No, that does answer the question, because, one of the things that I hear feedback wise from, especially preachers who watch these episodes, is they're really interested to hear how other people do it, because there's way more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to the week and sermon prep and all of that. And, just hearing you talk, it's interesting. I work way ahead. I know some people can't do that, and that's fine. I work way ahead. So when Thursday and Friday comes around, that's when you kind of turn the corner. I'd be beside myself with anxiety trying to, to get things together, but that's how you work. And I appreciate you sharing that. So talk a little bit about sermon prep. When Thursday comes around, what are you doing to get the sermon put together so that you can preach it on Sunday?
Yeah, I'm not a year in advance. I have some seed thoughts. You know what I'm saying? Maybe 5 or 6 things right now. As a congregation, we're looking through the book of Acts in Bible class on Sunday morning. I've borrowed some themes from that. And so I probably write sermons. My degree's in English education. I probably write sermons like a term paper. I do. I read a ton. And then I start putting all of that together. I'm gonna develop an outline in my head. Once I get that outline, the kind of the skeleton that I'm going to hang everything else on, I'm in good shape. You know what I'm saying? Here's
Sure.
here's the general thought that comes from Scripture in a format that I can follow and other people can follow. Now I'm illustrating and I'm applying, and that's a whole different kind of work for me. But I think I've got a book here on the shelf called "Preaching Someone Else's Sermon," which, I mean, if I hear something good, I'm not at all opposed to borrowing. And I absolutely don't have any trouble saying, I heard a great lesson from Chris, and he's my friend. And I may even call you and say, hey, I know I did that. And in the One Word series, I called Bill Watkins a time or two and said, Bill, man, this thing you did on one word, maybe the kingdom or something like that.
Right.
But the line from that book, I milked 3 cows, but the butter's mine, right? I did the churning. I did the digging. I did the reading. I did the research, and I may footnote it. And I don't mean that in a technical way that takes away from how you deliver it, but I'm going to call the guy's name. I'm reading Dan Chambers' book, whatever. Church is in the shape of Scripture, and Dan, I'm going to give credit where the idea came from. But I think that background in writing, kind of term paper, if that I don't know if that makes sense or not. I'm getting thoughts from a lot of different sources, but I still have to put that all together in a way that people can understand and follow. And, I'm not trying to showcase research. When I get up to preach, that's not what you know what I mean by that.
I do.
I want to do my homework, and then I'd like for that to just kind of fade to the background and present it in a way that people get their hands on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you get it from page to pulpit? Do you practice? Do you stand in the pulpit on Sunday morning before everybody gets there? Do you stand in front of a mirror? What do you do to get it in your mind worked out so that you spit it out right?
Yeah, I don't know that I have ever gone to the auditorium, and I know people do, and stand up there and verbatim just go through it. I'm an out loud thinker. I think that makes sense. I kind of talk it out as I'm writing it. And I don't know that other people do that, but by the time I've written it, I've reviewed it probably out loud several times because there's something about the sound. I think when I write, I can almost hear my voice, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You read something I've written. If I read it, I can hear myself saying it. And so there's a little bit of a rhythm to what I say and how I want to say it. And so I think I'm kind of rehearsing as I go. I remember that internship with Oglesby. It was a preaching internship in '96. He said, I never met anybody who liked preparing less than you or liked preaching more. It's just hard to make yourself sit down. And, I've assembled all the thoughts, just sitting down and making yourself get it on the page. I don't know why.
Yeah.
All these years later, I still struggle with that.
Yeah. It's kind of like the ball player that doesn't like to practice much, but boy, he's a gamer. He shows up, he's ready to play, but he doesn't like to practice.
At some point, you gotta put it on the page. You gotta structure what you're gonna say.
Yeah.
And I avoid that like the plague. I don't know why. There's so many other things, and then that's why I was saying Thursday or Friday, I've got to lock in. It's in my head. I've got to get it structured on the page. And
Yeah.
I kind of battle, uh, if I would do that earlier in the week, the later days might be a little less stressful.
Well, we had Steve Higginbotham the first round of 10 questions for 10 preachers, and he was that way. He said, he sits with it all week, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
Friday he puts it down, which would drive me nuts. But I mean, it works well for him. It obviously works well for you because y'all are both really good at this. But yeah, it's just funny to hear how different people respond and how they do things because, there really is more than one way to do this. So I know that balance is something we all try to achieve, and most of the guys, when we talk about it, I ask them about balance and how they achieve balance, and most of them would say, I don't. I try to, but I don't.
That's right.
Talk about, we're talking about work week, we're talking about preparing sermons, and you've talked about all the other things that kind of vie for your time. Discuss a little bit about how you strike a balance with family time and work and all that.
Yeah, if you don't protect it, nobody's going to protect it for you. I mean,
I agree.
The congregation will let you overextend yourself, and that's not a criticism. I'm not. It is up to you to strike that balance because nobody else is going to do it for you. I need to listen to my wife. If she's telling me, I'm gone too much or I'm not around enough, I think you have to be sensitive. She's always been a good. She just tells me, there's no complaining, there's no nagging. It's just, this is what's going on. And it's always been a real blessing to have, a wife that just helps me with that. Chris, younger preachers may not have experienced this yet, but my experience is no matter what I'm doing, there's something else I feel like I could be or should be doing. So if I'm at home, there's plenty I need to be doing in ministry all the time. If I'm preparing a sermon, there's a visit I should make. If I'm at the hospital, there's an article I should write. If I'm writing an article, shouldn't I be getting my class ready? And balance, there's Ira North had that book, Balance. I think there's something to it for the church, for a congregation. And I think there's something to that word for ministry, even balance in what we preach and how we preach, truth and love, grace and truth. You know what I mean? And striking a balance, you're always going to be struggling to find that. I'm not comfortable. It's a great question. I'm just not sure any of us ever do it as well as we'd like to. Very little.
No, but you said something really important there, and that is that the congregation will take as much as you give, and that's not a criticism. It's just the way that it is, and I've said it several times just on this series alone. Is probably the most important word to learn as a preacher is no.
Yeah.
Being able to say no to some things, and even being able to say no to some good things. They're just not best things in the moment, right?
Chris, I think one of my kids, I think Macy, one time we were at a restaurant. I was talking about things that I was invited to do and our scheduling. We talk about that stuff. The kids are there. And Macy called me an over yeser.
I love that term.
He was young. I mean, that was a while ago. An over yeser. That's a problem because when I say yes to certain ministry things, I'm saying no to some important family things.
Absolutely.
And that can become very problematic, and striking that balance is challenging. And
absolutely
convicting when you've got young children at the time. And when she said that, they were all home at that point. Boy, that gets your attention.
Absolutely it does. Yeah. Well, so we're going to finish with this question. Any advice for a young preacher starting out, or maybe somebody who's been doing this for a while? What's the one piece of advice that you would give to a minister that you feel like is the most important thing, or one of the most important things for them to know?
Did you read Francis Chan? I think it's Letters to the Church.
Mm-hmm. I did. Yeah.
He's got a line in there, and whether we would fully agree with kind of he's got preachers that work under him. I don't really understand the format completely, but there's a line along there's something along the lines of if they're not praying an hour a day, he would replace them with he would rather have someone who prays and does nothing else than someone who works all the time and never prays. And I'm just
Yeah.
going to tell you that line reduced me to tears.
Yeah.
Busy. You're busy. We are busy. And to get into a ministry that you felt like would lead you closer to God. I love God. I want to serve God. And then to allow your ministry for God to crowd God out of your life, that's crushing.
It is.
I think it's very possible. I think it's a huge mistake. And so trying to be more reflective of even in preaching, have I engaged God in what I'm going to say? Have I talked to God in the planning and the preparation for preaching and for ministry? And for younger preachers, Charles Hodge has a book called My Daily Walk with God. It's a great book. Everybody's got a first hour of the day. And your first hour of the day, 30 minutes in scripture, 30 minutes in prayer. I think what he's recommending is healthy. I think carving
Sure.
out the time and being disciplined to do it consistently every day, I think is going to be it's going to make the difference between being spiritually healthy and being a little bit anemic.
Mhm.
I think for young preachers, the advice of carving out that time with God, you're going to always be pouring yourself out. And you can be an empty cup or a dry sponge, or if you have that time with God, and I don't know how to explain this, or even if I'm explaining it, accurately, but if he's filling my cup, then I'm not pouring from a dry cup.
Yeah.
And there are times where you are just not physically, but just mentally, emotionally, spiritually tired. How many people are sitting in front of you on Sunday morning? There are a lot of people there. All of them have walked into that building with some need. And there's not enough of me. There's never going to be enough of me to meet all that need. But God's sufficient. So somehow understanding I'm not going to be able to do what only God can do. And whatever he does through me is going to be more than what I can do without him. I don't know. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
A lot of people say nice things to us and they build us up and they encourage us. And we can start thinking that we're doing more. And it's actually God working in us and really making sure that we're tending to what he's doing in our lives. I think is what equips us to be more effective in the work we're doing in other people's lives. I hope that makes sense. I think
Makes perfect
I've done
sense.
that wrong. I think I've done that wrong for a long time. I think it became very discouraging and very exhausting, and I'm trying to do that better.
Yeah. I am too. I think a lot of preachers could say the same thing. A lot of what we've learned to do right, we did it wrong to begin with. So I appreciate your honesty there and that answer. And I appreciate you joining us today, Tim. Thank you for taking time out of your busy week to be with us. And I want to thank all of our listeners and viewers that have tuned in as well. Share the word about the podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Facebook, YouTube. And also, I want to let you know that if you have a question about today's episode, maybe specifically for Tim, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com, and we can make sure that Tim gets that message, and I'm sure he'd be happy to respond to it and to give you feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Tim, once again, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to see you and get caught up, and appreciate the invitation and opportunity to talk about some of these ministry concepts and ideas. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for tuning in today. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.